Welcome to the meeting for the Policy and Planning Committee on the Thursday the 2nd of April 2026, and I will open the meeting with a karakia tematanga, and it's a new one. E te whānau, whaia te matauranga kia marama, kia whai taki ngā mahi katoa, tū maia tu kaha, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa. For this family gathering, seek knowledge for understanding, have purpose in all that you do, stand tall, be strong, let us show respect for each other. And I would like to welcome our mana whenua representatives, Emma Wyeth, welcome Emma, and Nadia Wesley-Smith, welcome to the table Nadia. And this is their first meeting as members, so we've had a little meeting beforehand and talked about a few things, and we shall make this a good meeting. Now we have our public forum. I would like to welcome Anna Knight, who is speaking on matters related to homelessness. We've talked about the microphone, haven't we? Awesome.
Morena. I'm here today mainly as a concerned citizen. While I do want to touch on the move-on orders, I understand that later today you will hear a report on various options for the homelessness outreach service. So firstly, I want to thank Council and staff for your long commitment to advocacy on homelessness and reiterate how great it is that you're unanimously on board with addressing this as a top priority. No one wants to see a family of 7 sleeping in 2 cars in this community, as Councillor Mayhem noted. I listened last night again to your hui of November 27th, councillors, and I was struck by how clearly well-intended you all are, without exception. So not to relitigate, but I do want to pull out some key messages. It seemed to me, if we were to boil down your responses, that the 8-7 split was about the capacity of the public versus the private sector to respond to this issue. Almost all of you expressed frustration at standing in for the shortcomings of central government. If I may zoom out a bit, when something is dealt with as a matter of public service, so through local or central government, doesn't that signal precisely that it has public worth? In other words, it is core business that we all agree we need to deal with collectively. Some things shouldn't perhaps be left to the whims of donors, or as Councillor Lefiso put it, the commodification of welfare and housing. Councillor Chambers also put it neatly, this is about the values of Dunedin as a city. You heard how at the Otago Housing Alliance last August, frontline experts and the public were crying out for your leadership, how they wanted the initial research and data to come from you. Embedding the principles at DCC level to then transfer to community in the mid to long term through the shared vision of functional zero, or Jill's utopia, seems sensible. I don't think anyone ever mistook the DCC for a mental health expert. Such arguments miss the point. The DCC does want to work with the existing expertise in the community. What is missing are the linkages. The point was made that the DCC is already a logical touchstone through all its teams who are able to gather intel across the city. Councillors' relative neutrality also helps homeless whānau navigate. The beauty of an outreach service is that it's about getting alongside homeless people and helping them get where they need to be in their own time. Jill Brown. Prioritising cost effectiveness, however, does not tend to signal that something is important. Can you have both? Arguably, yes. But as Councillor Treadwell mentioned, consistent availability of funding is key. And is 0.1% of rates really such a burden on ratepayers who have already sent a strong message that this is a key priority for them? So I wish you well, councillors, in your decision making today, and I take comfort in the fact all your hearts are in the right place. But please remember this basic principle that if your community is asking for your leadership on this, then it's no accident. It's undoubtedly a testament to your policy advisor, and it's because the public sector is synonymous for many with what we uphold as fundamental. If local councils pick up the slack, even temporarily, that sends an important signal to central government. And the government's messaging on homelessness, frankly, stinks. So I'm moving on to move-on orders. I read the recent article in the ODT from local stakeholders about the proposed move-on orders who agree. They write, if we treat homelessness as a visibility problem, success becomes fewer people seen, not fewer people without homes. In Otago, where hardship is often already out of sight, move-on powers risk locking in a quiet cycle, disperse, hide, repeat. These powers will enable police to require people to leave a public area for up to 24 hours. In an amendment to the Summary Offences Act, the move-on orders can be applied to anyone over the age of 14 who is exhibiting disorderly or threatening behaviour, obstructing a business entryway, rough sleeping or begging. Those who break the order risk a fine of up to $2,000 or a 3-month jail term. I'll just skip down. Many have called it criminalising homelessness. A psychology professor from Massey writes, we are giving a false impression of New Zealand when we Disneyfy CBDs. And a professor from Otago University calls this a return to the medieval poor laws. Not even the Police Association endorses it, who do not see this as another tool as pitched, but as another burden on their time. In short, banishing strategies and punitive approaches to hardship and homelessness don't work. They just make hard lives even harder. And I'll leave it there, but I've got some key asks for you, which I sent round in the document, so maybe you can ask me about that in question time. How's that?
Shall I go first and ask you about your key asks, and then I've got Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Barker. So the key asks are that the council, firstly, make a public statement that they will not work with police to enforce the move-on orders on the grounds that it is unfair, discriminatory and in breach of the New Zealand Bill of Rights, notably the freedom of movement and liberty of the person. And I've provided you with the text in the thing that was circulated this morning of the Bill of Rights. And obviously you know that works in tandem with other laws, but it's something for you to consider. Number two, in association with local stakeholders, that councillors consider making submissions under the Select Committee process to oppose the proposed amendment to the Summary Offences Act. Now, the government has said that they want to enact this swiftly, and they've said before the election. And I haven't made that a decision. I suggest it's up to individual councillors to make those submissions, but you know, obviously you do what you think is best. And number three, that council invest in Orange Sky initiative or similar, and consider ways they could implement the Welsh approach of a legal duty of care for local authorities to prevent and relieve homelessness. Thank you. Thank you,
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Barker. Thank you, Ms Knight. And excuse my sweaty lateness. The bike traffic out there is horrific today. Listen, there is a call for government to take responsibility. You mentioned, I think you said that community are asking us to take responsibility. So is it the case, whether we like it or not, Ms Knight, that we do have a role in taking responsibility? And I think you said, you mentioned things like linkages, touchstones, and I asked myself maybe the clue is in the word outreach. So sort of that long-winded question.
Yeah, that's a perfect summary, really. I think outreach, the clue is in the name. And yeah, I really wanted to bring it back to brass tacks of because, you know, obviously we can get into a lot of discussion around what's the best way to do this, and we all want to do it the right way. But I just thought that from that, the earlier hui, an element that was missing was the sort of symbolic element of what you're all here for as governors and what the public service is about. You know, it really is a way of signalling the importance of something. And so I kind of liked the beauty of the initial motion, which was already kind of factoring in and acknowledging that the expertise is in the community and that you were able to sort of, you know, start here with the research, the data, the sort of overview, and those things have obviously already been ably led, and then farm it out. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Treadwell.
Tēnā koe, Ms Knight. Thanks so much for your well-articulated and researched presentation today. I was just wondering if you could expand on the Welsh approach to a duty of care, which is mentioned in the handout.
Okay, so the way I understand that, and yes, it was deliberately a little bit elliptical because I'm a layperson and not an expert on this, but from what I gather, it makes it. I mean, one of the things when I was researching housing and homelessness a while ago, one of the key ways that people slip through the gaps is that the agencies release them into nowhere, essentially. And so what that Welsh duty of care was trying to tighten up was making sure that there's not a road to nowhere, making sure that the onus is on those services and that they have the public mandate for that via those laws to ensure that it's not just a push from pillar to post, you know.
Just so further to that, so that's sort of speaking to the interconnectedness of the services, I suppose. Would that be right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Lund has a question, and we've just got 30 seconds. Councillor Lund? We've just, well, we're obviously not going to hear from Mandy. Can you go? We'll just add that extra 30 seconds on.
Ms Knight, did you know that we're actually launching Orange Sky here in Dunedin at the end of the month?
Yes, I was aware of that and I've signed up to volunteer. Thanks.
Thank you. Was Councillor Lund? Oh, okay. Okay, it was a different question. Okay, thank you. Thank you. We're out of time. We're out of time. Right. I've got Chris Hawkins will be in attendance to speak about a proposal for DCC to fund outreach workers to the homeless community. Welcome, Chris. Now, if you're familiar with the microphone, you just push it to speak and push it to answer, and whenever anyone asks you a question, they'll push it as well. So you have 5 minutes, and then afterwards we will have 5 minutes for questions if you would like that.
Good morning, councillors. My name is Christopher Hawkins. I'm a student at the University of Otago, and I was born and raised here in Dunedin. I was one of the organisers of the recent letter writing session, asking central government to take more responsibility for homelessness and particularly to end the punitive elements of the proposed move-on orders. And it was in the course of research for that I discovered that we only have one homelessness outreach worker in Dunedin, and that the funding for him from MSD is set to expire later this year. So I wanted to go a bit into what homelessness outreach does and why it's essential. You know, because if we don't have a frontline worker going out there and talking to people who are sleeping in their cars and this kind of thing, then we basically won't have a reliable indication of how many people are sleeping rough. And any problem is a lot more difficult to solve if we don't have reliable data on it. So obviously it's not ideal that central government is not taking the responsibility it should for this, but I think at this juncture it's essential that council does step up and fill the gap to fund outreach services. In terms of the internal decision about whether to outsource it or whether to do it in-house, I'm not going to claim any kind of special expertise about the merits of one or another. But I guess just on the face of it, then it seems like if council were to consider doing it in-house, it would be in a unique position due to the pre-existing linkages with other services, like the hospital and the council's own provision of community housing. I think it would probably be necessary to fund at least 2 workers for safety reasons, if nothing else. I'm sure many of you have been elected with the mandate to keep the rates low, but I've lived my whole life in the city, and I know that the people of Dunedin are a kind-hearted bunch, and if there's one thing that they would want their rates money to go to, it would be to help the most vulnerable among us get back on their feet. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to take questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to take
Okay,
questions.
thank you. Does anyone have questions? Oh, Councillor Walker.
Be people piling in to ask. Thank you for that really concise and on-point presentation, Mr. Hawkins. You talked about the outreach is about data, and no disagreement there, but is it also important that it builds relationships as well?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I would expect that a lot of people in the homeless community have had some previous, or may have had some previous bad interactions and generally not be doing very well. So I think having somebody who comes to them is a really powerful signal that there is someone that they can trust, and might be the first step to getting them into services.
Councillor Treadwell.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Hawkins, and thanks for your work in this area. Appreciate the activism. I was just wondering if you could expand on why specifically you're interested in 2 funded outreach workers for safety.
I'm not going to claim particular expertise, but I guess for one thing that it could be that one worker might have adverse reactions, or it could be that some event happens where it's useful to have another witness. Or yeah, I mean, I don't know the specifics too much.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ong.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I want to ask, we have a significant amount of grants budget that has been set aside still, and that's taken into account what, we have scarcity of resources as well. How do you see financial grants coming into addressing what you're seeking specifically?
I don't know a lot about internal council finance, and I'll leave that to the wisdom of the councillors to decide.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. No more questions. Thank you for your presentation. I'll just signal that there was going to be a council meeting. The CEO is withdrawing the paper for the meeting after this on homelessness. I think you all got an email a little while ago, and the meeting will be rescheduled possibly for next week. Moving on to apologies, I move that the committee accepts the apology from Marie Lafiso. Is there a seconder? Seconder, Deputy Mayor Lucas. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, abstentions, that is carried. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded of the need to stand aside from decision making when a conflict arises between their role as an elected representative and any private or other external interests they might have. Are there any changes or updates? If there's no changes, I move that the committee notes the elected members' interest register attached as attachment A and confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor Lucas. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, abstentions, I declare that the motion is carried. Confirmation of minutes, the policy. Aye? Did I miss that? It appears I missed a page, apologies. Confirmation of agenda. I move that, stuck together. I move that the committee confirms the agenda without additional alteration. Seconded, Deputy Mayor Lucas. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, abstentions, that is carried. Now, confirmation of minutes. I move that the committee confirms the public part of the minutes of the Policy and Planning Committee meeting held on the 5th of February 2026 as a correct record. Seconded, Deputy Mayor Lucas. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, abstentions. We've got abstentions from our 2 new members. Thank you. I declare the motion is carried. Part A, reports. And welcome Mr. Rory McLean, Senior Policy Analyst for Zero Carbon, will speak to this report. Kia ora and welcome. Have you got any opening comments?
Kia ora koutou. Yes, I have two. The first one, and apologies for this one if you were reading this late at night. Paragraph 15, as it currently stands, makes very little sense in the second sentence. So instead of, it's sort of, the second sentence ends with "the may shore up achievement" and then gets more nonsensical from there. The whole sentence should read, "This reduction represented significant progress towards the 26-27 interim emissions target, with the DCC falling 1,700 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent short of achieving it in 24-25. So if you reread that 6 times and didn't know what you're looking at, that'd be why. The second comment I'd make is that Council was earlier provided an update on DCC's emissions for half year 25-26 in the 19th of March Finance and Performance Committee meeting, which was embedded in the level of service update. That stated there was a 38% reduction in DCC's emissions for the sources measured compared with the baseline year of 18-19. And in this report it says there's a 34% reduction. The 34% reduction is the correct and most up-to-date figure, and that's because information on landfill gas capture at Green Island landfill came in after that that meeting on the 19th of March. So just in case any of you had picked up on that, and otherwise I'll take any questions.
Thank you. I have a question around, it's my ignorance one, it's on page 23, paragraph 23, about what influent is. So it says that Tahuna wastewater treatment plant influent was down 20%. Is that the stuff that flows in?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it influent of effluent almost?
Yes.
Okay.
Influent and effluence. What goes out out the other end once everything's taken out. And
thank you. It seemed logical, but I did want to make sure that I did have it absolutely correct. There was another question around Moana Pool. It's page 2536, and it just talks about it is not known how much LPG the current design will displace. So is this talking about plans for Moana Pool that we haven't solidified what the plans are, so we can't forecast what the emissions might be?
Yes, so there's a budget allocated to improvements at Moana Pool, and part of that is upgrading the existing heat recovery system. And so that went out to market. The quote that came back was far in excess of the budget, so that's currently being redesigned. And so as a result, we're not quite sure what the new design would achieve in terms of reductions against the current day Moana Pool LPG. So it's budgeted, but we're bringing the design back within budget.
My next question is around when will we set the implementation plan for 26-27, because this is a report on the 25-26 implementation plan, and I think that the 25-26 implementation plan came in September last year. So would we be expecting, it would be the 26-27 implementation plan to come in September?
That would be, it would be around that time. The exact timing will depend on your other agenda items, and we tend to put that up at the same time as the full year results for the DCC's emissions. And that depends on getting it audited and verified. So it would be around that time. The confirmation will be a bit closer to the time, and obviously setting team budgets and priorities feeds into that. So that's all part of the annual plan process too.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask how it relates to the annual plan process, because we would have already set the budget then, so it would be within the budget. Yeah. Okay, I've got councillors Vandervis, Treadwell and Walker, and Deputy Mayor Lucas and Ong.
Thank you. In the first page of the report, page 19 and 3, it says, overall, the provision data suggests DCC emissions from the sources included are 34% lower than the same period in baseline year, which you've just confirmed to be 18-19, and 5% higher than the same period last year. So have the emissions gone up in the last year by 5%?
Yes, so they're well down from 18-19, but slightly up from last year in the first half of 24-25. So July to December 2024, the emissions were 5% lower than July to December 2025, and that mostly relates to Green Island landfill, which has covered off the landfill gas capture at the landfill actually improved, but there was a tweak in the ETS regulations, which brings up the default emissions for every landfill across the country. So the performance was slightly better, the waste tonnages were slightly up, and there was that change to regulations, all of which add to slightly higher emissions from Green Island. And there was also higher electricity emissions because the gas engine at Green Island wastewater treatment plant wasn't operating during July to December 2025, which was due to just covered off in one of the paragraphs.
Page 22, I think
22.
it's paragraph
Thank
22.
You. So those are the main things that contributed to higher emissions in July to December 2025 compared with July to December 2024. But compared to our baseline year, we're doing a lot better. Yeah, so that's the gist of.
So you've explained the higher and lower, but what you've confirmed is that our DCC emissions were 5% higher than the previous year. So they've gone up.
Yes, they've gone up for the reasons I've described. Yep.
When we had the workshop, you said that regarding agriculture in particular, but I think there was a general comment, you said that there are gaps in what we measure. I asked then why it was that you measured the gas outputs from agriculture, that is to say animal CO2 or methane, but you didn't measure the sequestration in pasture crops or bush. Can you explain why you measure the one thing but then not the other?
I can, Councillor. Can we hold that until the next item? We're talking about DCC's organisational emissions here. The next item is about the city emissions inventory, where that agriculture and city level carbon sequestration sits. So let's park that one until the next item.
Well, there is a simple answer. Do you or do you not measure the gas sequestration into pasture, crops and bush?
It's measured into bush and so native vegetation and other things like gorse and broom. It's not measured into grasslands. From the research, that sequestration is much lower than from bush, trees, shrubs, those kind of things, but it's not measured in that city emissions footprint, which we'll get to in the next item.
Would you accept, however, that there are millions of acres of
I think
pasture?
we'll just Councillor Vandervis, I think we'll discuss it in the next one. We'll do the DCC emissions in this one, and then in the next one we'll continue this discussion. Thank you.
Okay. My next question then relates to the 13% reduction in general emissions that you spoke of at our last meeting. And my question was, considering that that's since 2018, that means the reduction has basically been, on that figure that you gave us the other day, only 1.5% per year. And would that not be more easily accounted for by COVID, with more people working from home, the economy shrinking, more EVs being used, and a significant increase in the efficiency of internal combustion engines?
Sorry, Councillor, I didn't mean to end your question. Again, I can give a detailed response to that question, but that's in the city emissions footprint or in the DCC item. So to make sure we don't confuse ourselves too much, I'll again respond to that one in the next item.
So just to clarify, this is on the DCC business, I guess we call it, emissions, this paper, and the next paper is on the citywide emissions, is that correct?
Yes, so this paper is on DCC emissions, and it's also on Zero Carbon Implementation Plan actions. But the emissions footprint, which I'm very excited to get into the weeds of as well, that's the next item.
Okay.
So,
Okay, thank you. Councillor Treadwell.
Thank you, Your Worship, and tēnā koe, Mr McLean. A couple of questions, if I may. Starting with page 23, I've got a couple of just sort of big number questions. Looking at the emissions from biomass, obviously it's quite a large percentage increase, and my assumption from that is that there were just very few emissions from that source in the baseline year. Would that be the correct assumption?
that's right. Biomass is used at Botanic Gardens in the baseline, which you can see there's about 6 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent from that baseline year. And then Te Puna o Whakaihu opens, which uses biomass in the form of wood chips. And so you see a ridiculous variance from baseline, but that's just because there's an extra facility. It's covered in the report that the emissions from biomass are far lower than LPG, coal, diesel, if you were to use a fossil fueled heating source.
Awesome, thanks for clarifying that. And then just jumping to page 29, so looking at attachment A, we've got an increase in the rental car or emissions attributed to rental car use under business travel, and again it's a really high variance percentage. So again, my assumption was that it's coming up from quite a small volume, or could you expand on why that one's such a high variance?
Yep, it's coming up from a very small volume. So to put those figures into context, so the first half of, so July to December 2025, that's half a tonne of carbon dioxide, it's 500 kilograms. If you were to fill up a 50 litre petrol car, that would work out to about 120 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent when that petrol was out the exhaust. So you're looking at about 4 tanks of petrol, compared to, if you look at Tahuna, uses hundreds of thousands of litres of diesel to run the sludge incinerator. So if that helps put it into context.
Absolutely, just handy getting the perspective, amongst the variance increases. And final question is, could you expand on what a gas flare is, specifically an enclosed gas flare for us lay people?
Yeah, to get a really detailed explainer on that, you'd need our landfill engineer Lincoln here, and he would be very excited to explain it. But in terms of my understanding, the previous gas flare was what's called a candlestick flare. Don't ask me what that really means, but under the ETS, you could, any gas that passed through that, you could certify that 50% of it was actually destroyed, and so the methane was burnt and it is returned to CO2, which is part of the natural carbon cycle. So in carbon accounting terms, that CO2 is considered biogenic and isn't added to your greenhouse gas emissions. So we had the candlestick flare, you could claim half. We've got the new enclosed flare, which is far more efficient at destroying that landfill gas, and it's certified for 98.8% of all the gas going through it is destroyed and returns to that natural carbon cycle. And so there's a very significant improvement in the landfill gas destruction part of the equation. Does that help clarify?
It does. I think I'm probably going to look up a picture of it, but I understand the function a lot better now. Thank you. Just a final, not a question, but a note on page 37. Basically, it's just a little bit weird that the legend is at the bottom of the table, and also there's a typo in the green key of the legend where it says objectives or M+B166, etc. But it's...
We always get something wrong there. Apologies for that. that's something to do with the Excel formatting that I'll go and scratch my head. But yes, the legend at the top makes a lot more sense. So we'll take that away, and I'll try to figure out what plus B16. Oh, it's some sort of sum equation that's got in there. Sorry about that.
Can I just clarify, on page 22 it talks about, paragraph 21, it just talks about DCC internal waste volumes, which is DCC's direct contribution to Green Island landfill volumes. That's not just emptying the rubbish bins, is it? Is that all of our sludge and everything? Like, how do you define internal waste volumes?
So it's not the sludge. It's sort of all the waste collected from DCC facilities. So in lay person terms, it would be all the rubbish bins.
Oh, so it is all the internal rubbish bins.
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
that's good to know. That was a good result. Thank you. Now I've got quite a list of councillors. So I've got Walker, Lucas, Ong, Sims, Lund, Chambers, Hall. So Councillor Walker.
Thank you. So I'm looking at two Manawhenua reps and feeling very sorry for you because it's really hard papers for you to come in on. It's hard enough for us to understand, so don't run away after this meeting, please. Listen, two questions. One relates to Councillor Vendervis's question around the variance and the events. But wouldn't it be the case that, you mentioned Green Island, and I think maybe Councillor somebody else mentioned COVID, wouldn't certain events over the years are potentially going to change things? I mean, there's nothing more pertinent now than the crisis in the Mideast, which may have effects on transport emissions, for example. So there's going to be events that are going to upset the predictions.
Yes, and to give a very fence-sitting answer, some of those events will make enduring changes, and some of those events will just be a short-term shift, and it's hard to predict.
So my main question is, in terms of the 54 time-bound projects, and you talk about 20 on track, and I can't remember how many are delayed, and some are not going to make it. Is it right from my reading of these papers that a lot of the stuff has been, and I'll use the word deferred, to the long-term plan and decisions we make as a council that will ultimately feed into whether some of those make it, some don't, or some are removed? Is that my reading of?
Yes, I think in a generalised way, yes, and particularly in relation to waste futures and actions to divert more materials from landfill.
Sorry, the question I know the answer to, I'll ask it anyway, and ultimately that becomes a political decision in terms of what's in and out.
Yes, but any advice we're happy to provide.
Deputy Mayor Lucas.
Thank you. And I was reading this late at night, and I'm sorry to come back to the gas flare. I'm just trying to get my head around it. And in terms of the electricity consumption, because previously out at Green Island there was enough to from the gas to provide the electricity and back to the grid. But under the new flare, we'll only be just enough for what's needed at Green Island. I'm just trying to get it clarified.
Yes, so as covered in the report, July to December last year, that gas engine wasn't running, but moving forward, that baseload electricity will be covered. And July to December as well as having this enclosed flare, the national electricity grid was really had a high percentage of renewables because of high lake levels, and a spin-off of that is that we basically got no money for exporting power. And when you've got, an electricity system which is flooded with energy, we're not really helping anyone by putting more into the grid. So that base load will be covered. If there's a dry year or something like that where electricity is short, then we may export to the grid. And by we, I mean the waste team, and we'll make decisions in that space. So it was kind of a combination of that new flare and also that there wasn't really a financial benefit or real world benefit to export power to the grid.
Thank you. That's the missing piece that I just didn't quite understand. Thank you. Now my other question is on page 25 when we talk about DCC staff travel, and it talks about however staff face difficulties in finding other modes of transport. That's not a DCC issue. That's a personal issue. Maybe they've got to take kids to school on their way, or they have to be available to take kids to sport after work. That's those kind of issues that it's not an actual DCC issue that's causing them the difficulties in alternative modes of transport. I just want to get that clarified.
So it is how people come to and from work, and in sort of the current standards of emissions reporting for organisations, considering what you can do as an organisation to support how people come to and from work and those that want to travel in a sustainable way by the bus or walking or biking or on a scooter, is considered an indirect emission source for an organisation. So there's some things that organisations can do to support staff, and for instance, in the Civic Centre, there's been more provision of showers and things like that, so that when people are biking, they can use them, and there's bike parking available. Where the responsibility lies is there's some things that organisations can do to support, and then there's obviously lots of stuff that's down to the responsibility of staff members and the choices they make.
I guess that's my point, is that we've probably done, as an organisation, as much as we can to help staff, whether it be, if somebody's catching a bus and they don't arrive, the bus doesn't get them until 5 minutes after their normal start time. That's fine. It's those kind of things, but there's probably not a lot more as an organisation that we can do to help staff. It's other issues at play.
There are some actions in the zero carbon implementation plan that aren't currently being progressed. So there are other things that could be considered. It's really down to people's personal views as to what extent those actions should be done or should not be done. Yep.
Can I just jump in on that? Do we have a staff travel plan? I think at some stage in the zero carbon plan there was working for travel plans for, we're a big employer and for other employers as well, and I know we didn't fund the external ones, but do we have an internal staff travel plan?
So we don't have a standalone internal staff travel plan, but what we do have is we have the actions that are covered off in that implementation plan, and we also have actions that are embedded in DCC's emissions reduction plan for an organisation. So while we don't have a nice standalone document, we do have actions and timelines and things like that. So we kind of functionally have what a staff travel plan would have in terms of actions and tracking those, but we don't have that as a standalone plan.
And with the current fuel crisis and the business continuity plan, is this team working with the management team on some of the options? Because obviously the options with a fuel crisis will hopefully impact on some of the emissions. So is part of the business continuity plan, does it have working from home and helping staff? David, that might be one for you. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Sophie. And maybe if I could just add to the last question. So we ascertain staff's typical travel modes, and we do encourage changing that travel mode from single occupied cars, for example, where it's possible. So cycling, public transport, car sharing. So we have a live and ongoing conversation with staff on that topic. Whilst, as Mr. McLean says, we don't have an individual plan on that, it is a live conversation with staff. Regarding business continuity plans, yes, we're looking at all and every means to be efficient with our use of fuel, and that includes staff car sharing to particular sites or locations where they need to, and the general use of fuel and the related energy sources across the organisation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Councillor Ong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Now, achieving zero carbon objectives are often seen as a cost to our city versus going forward as a financial return. I want to ask, in our Waipori Fund being strategically investing into companies that provide a financial return and create jobs and bring climate sustainability expertise into our city, how do you see that going forward as a tool for us?
Decisions around the Waipori Fund are not something that I can really provide advice on. It's not an area that I've looked at in any detail.
But you would understand the companies that can provide solutions on to what you are seeking to achieve and the international expertise that's out there from these companies.
Okay.
Yes, I think if you could, please.
Councillor Long, I'm not sure that's a question related to this particular report, and I don't think it's appropriate for Mr McLean to answer that particular question.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie, and thank you guys for the presentation again. So looking at the table on page 29, I just want to be, I'm sort of trying to clarify a lot of things from my own benefit towards a paper that I'm currently writing, but to be very clear that the emissions from the Green Island landfill, 15,059 tonnes of CO2, we know that the most damaging greenhouse gas release from landfill is methane, but we're expressing that figure as a tonnes of CO2. Do we convert the methane into... Sorry, how do we do that? I think you know what I'm asking.
Yeah, so by that do you mean like when we say 15,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent, like what's the conversion rate of methane to CO2? Is that the sort of question you're asking?
Yeah, that's precisely the question. My understanding is that methane is something like 15 times more damaging than CO2 per tonne. So do we convert it to express it as CO2 by applying that factor? Yeah, it's separate to the flare issue, which I'll come to in a minute.
Okay, I just wanted to double check because yes, you're right. The methane, all gases are converted into this tonnes of CO2 equivalent for comparability. Methane, if you think about the climate impact over a 100-year period, every tonne of methane released into the atmosphere is considered to be 27.2, I think it is, times the it would be 27.2 tonnes of carbon dioxide would equate to 1 tonne of methane. So it's converted at that ratio. So essentially every tonne of methane is 27 times more potent than CO2 in terms of greenhouse gas warming.
Thank you. I didn't know that, so that's a great answer. Thank you. In terms of you're talking about the new flare destroying 98% of the gas that's delivered to it, but you spoke at the previous meeting about us capturing 50% of the gas. So is that destroying 98% of the 50% that we capture?
So if you look to, if I can shuffle my papers. So if you look to paragraph 21 on page 22, confusingly, that shows that in 2024, 49.1% of all the landfill gas that was modelled to be created by that landfill was destroyed. And then in 2025, there's a slight improvement to 49.8% of all the landfill gas modelled to be from Green Island landfill destroyed. So that percentage you get at the end is the actual destruction amount versus the modelled total amount of methane that's generated by the landfill. So it takes into account how much you've pumped through the flare or the gas engine and what percentage of that gas that goes through them you actually think has been destroyed. Does that clarify?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. So in respect to, and it strikes me this is over half of the DCC activity coming from this one source. And I look at transport emissions at 184 for diesel and 40 for petrol. You know, we could electrify the entire fleet and it would have nowhere near as much impact as Green Island is having. If we then transport that waste somewhere else that has a 98% gas capture rate, does that mean that figure almost disappears from the table altogether?
It would be a lot lower if it went to a different landfill. There would be ongoing emissions from Green Island landfill based on the waste that's already there. So without looking into that particular question in detail, I couldn't kind of balance those direct landfill emissions for you. Yeah, so there'd be the additional emissions from the trucking, but in terms of the direct landfill emissions, a more modern landfill that captures and destroys high quantities of landfill gas, wherever that landfill may be, would result in lower direct landfill emissions than Green Island. Yeah.
And if I could just sneak one more in. So a transport expert has calculated for me that the transport emissions relating to transporting the waste to Winton would be 600 tonnes. So we would be effectively potentially swapping 15,000 tonnes of landfill emissions for 600 tonnes of transport emissions. Would that 600 tonne, given that our total diesel emissions at the moment is only 184 tonnes, would that 600 tonnes be, with your expertise, be accurate?
As I say, Councillor, I haven't looked into that in detail, so I wouldn't refute your figures or the person who provided those figures, but I haven't looked at it in detail in terms of those trade-offs, so I couldn't really comment beyond what I've said. Yeah.
Councillor Lund.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep. Right. Some of my questions have been asked and answered, but I'm going to turn to paragraph 37, which is the staff travel, which Deputy Mayor Lucas touched on. And what I'm particularly interested in is the statement that the DCC's staff's travel emissions will require action to remove some of the barriers. Now, we've just heard from Deputy Mayor Lucas that she believes that we've done as much as we can, but Mr. McLean, you've said that there are some actions in the implementation plan. What specifically are these actions relating to staff travel?
I think they're on page 34 and 35.
Paragraph 37, page 25.
Oh, I'm just talking about the answer.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, Councillor. I was trying to get to in attachment C. I was trying to get to the appropriate page to refer to. So if you look at page 34 in attachment C and page 35, there's two particular actions there that aren't progressing at this time, which is investigate options to encourage and enable greater uptake of e-bikes by DCC staff, and then implement preferred e-bike option for DCC staff. So that's an example of something that could be done that isn't able to progress at this time.
Well, isn't it true that the council already has or had a program in place to subsidise e-bikes for all staff, and the stated intent of that program in 2020 or 2021 was to have up to 300 staff using e-bikes at a cost of $2,000 per bike to the council. Is that not true? And is that an action that that it's not under consideration now? But can we rule that in or rule that out, please?
If I could jump in, please, Mayor Sophie and Councillor Lund. I'm not aware of that particular provision. I would have to look at that with Mr. McLean.
It's a program that was in the ODT in 2020. There was articles about it that was a policy that was implemented in place. And at one point, they were disappointed at the uptake, but the stated aim of the council was to have 300 staff taking advantage of subsidised e-bikes to use while travelling to and from work. Is that program still in place? And how much did it cost when it was in place? And how many staff took advantage of it are my questions, which I would like answers on.
Sorry, Mr. McLean. Thanks, Councillor Lund. I think there's a number of questions there that we may not be able to provide answers to here and now in the room, but we'll come back to you on that.
Thank you.
But can I have an acknowledgement? Can I have an acknowledgement that program was in place?
Personally, I don't know that it was in place.
Well, it was in the ODT.
I don't necessarily know that we can believe everything we read in the ODT, but I will follow that up, because I'm unaware that that was put in place, and perhaps it was put forward but maybe not budgeted for. Councillor Vandervis, you look like you know something about it.
Yeah, there was a policy. I remember at the time questioning the $2,000 subsidised rate for these e-bikes, when at the time you could get a quite reasonable e-bike for $750 if you bought them in bulk. 100. The discussion was there, the media coverage was there, but I don't believe much has happened since.
No, I don't recall anything. Councillor Lund, we will certainly find out what happened there. Thank you.
But my question is to the Zero Carbon team: is this a measure that they are promoting? That it's not in the plan at this time, but can we have an assurance that we will not be subsidising e-bikes from staff, or that will not
that is a council decision that will be made when the implementation comes through. So staff don't make those decisions; council makes those decisions.
Well, my next question to the Mr. McLean and the Zero Carbon team is around regarding staff travel choices. I'd like to know around conference attendance, whether the council is seeking to limit their carbon footprints. So specifically, are we looking at implementing a policy where we basically encourage or want council staff to attend conferences by Zoom and not in person? And specifically, how many of the Zero Carbon and the sustainability team and the South Dunedin Futures team have travelled to conferences in the last year?
I'll pick this up first, if I may. So yes, your point's valid. We definitely look at travel, and we'll first and foremost seek to attend conferences away from the city by remote means, so Zoom in. So that's definitely something we're looking at. If there's a need to attend in person, such as presenting on a project that is of merit to herald and flag in terms of the good work we're doing, we will look at that. But priority is given first to attending by remote means. In terms of who's attended what, I wouldn't have those figures in front of me.
Right, but I'm assuming we can get those.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Just one last question in relation to paragraph 32, and it's just in relation to some of the waste minimisation measures that have been currently put on hold. And one of them is just around the timber recycling initiative. I'm curious to know how the amount of the timber, the 4,400 tonnes, is estimated, and does it allow for any? Is it assuming that every piece of timber is not recycled, i.e., there's no other, voluntary recycling?
Essentially, it's saying that if the current rates of timber diversion are maintained through to 2030, then there would be an additional 4,400 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent a year. Your question there, yes, there is more stuff that could happen without, obviously, direct council intervention that would reduce those emissions. So it's just a statement of if currently the status quo continues, this is what it would look like in 2030 in terms of the amount of timber that ends up in landfill at the moment.
Right. Is that quantity decreasing year on year or increasing?
The council only does what's called the swap surveys every few years. So I'm not entirely sure the exact year that it was last done, but it was a few years ago. So I couldn't comment on the exact timber quantities in the landfill right now. But we'd get that information to you as soon as we have that data. And I can provide an update once I chat with the waste team around timeframes for that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chambers.
Yeah, thanks. A couple of questions. Firstly, can it these nice colourful tables on page 29 and 30 of our paper today about linking waste to the transport of that waste. At the moment, the contents of those big green bins that we have is being sort of pulped and transported to a plant in Timaru. So where will the emissions associated with that transport be captured?
Thank you, Councillor. So, as mentioned at the top of this report, this is providing an update on the sources that we were able to provide an update on. One of the sources we haven't provided an update on is on our major suppliers' emissions. That will be provided in the full year results, and that will include the contractor emissions associated with trucking that composting material to Timaru and then the truck coming back. So they're not in these figures, but we will definitely provide you that information when it's available.
You sort of answered my next question, and that is, if you outsource a service, do you outsource the emissions associated with that service?
Yeah, a great question. In the past, before my time, these things weren't measured, but we're expanding to understand our direct footprint, the buildings, the art gallery here, but then that indirect stuff in terms of what we contract out. So yes, we are bringing in more and more and more of those indirect emissions in terms of the services we contract out, and we think at the moment we're capturing all the big ones, but we keep, as contracts renew, we keep bringing in some of those smaller sources as well.
Councillor Hall, and then Gary, and then Vandevers.
On page 26, I think item 38, I see the DCC is exploring solar. Could this be a path to make good gains in CO2 reduction and help us meet our targets? Should we fast track that exploration?
So we're going as fast as we can with that exploration in-house. It's a project we're looking at. We're hoping it to be a win-win-win in terms of reducing reliance on the grid, which would reduce our reported electricity emissions, only progressing if it reduces operational costs, even when you factor in capital costs and repaying that debt, and then also increasing reliance, resilience, I should say, in terms of if there were any electricity outages. So yes, that's something we'll progress as quickly as we can in terms of getting to the point where we can provide options for consideration. But essentially, it's looking to do all those good things, as I said, reduce costs, reduce emissions, and improve resilience.
That sounds fantastic, especially reducing the operational costs. Page 25 says delayed to the waste diversion project could materially undermine our targets. And if timber diversion stays low, what's the backup plan? If the projects remain deferred, do we have one?
It's a very large, as Councillor Sims noted, waste to landfill is a very large portion of DCC's organisational emissions. It's very difficult to find 4,000 tonnes of reductions in emissions elsewhere. We would do our best, but yes, I guess that's all I can say there.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Worship. Tēnā kōrua, gentlemen. My question is back around the e-bike, and I do recall the proposal, but not how far it got. And my question is prompted because of an item on Radio New Zealand this morning, which was about an app, a startup app called Walk Ride that 2,000 employers across New Zealand have picked up. And I believe it's around employees sacrificing some of their salary in a particularly efficient way for the organisation to buy the e-bikes. So the cost is to the employee. Are we looking at that option? Because that will be new. I think it's 3 years old, new since perhaps we originally considered that. And are we looking at also promoting other, when we get to the city, this is also part of the city discussion, other apps, for example, Parkable, which came up the other day, and Parkable being the app Silverfern Farms uses for its parking buildings when employees who don't have leased car parks can check in to see if there's a park available if someone's sick or travelling out of town or whatever. So it's around whether we're promoting those kinds of things and whether we're looking at it for ourselves.
Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the first question about work ride, yes, that's a salary sacrifice scheme where essentially you avoid a staff member sacrifices their salary before any tax comes off, and that gross part of their salary is used towards paying off the bike. It's essentially, other than administration costs for the organisation, a cost-neutral scheme, or even, depending on how you calculate it, it can reduce the sort of KiwiSaver contribution. So that's the kind of thing that has been explored, but as noted, it's not being progressed at this time. In terms of the Parkmate, yeah, we don't have something like that in train at DCC, and I couldn't really comment on the number of car parks that would actually be available through something like that for staff.
And thank you for your answer. And perhaps with the changing landscape, we'll consider that around this table. And my second question is around just zooming out a little bit. You follow best practice, do you not? This is the way you calculate emissions is not picked out of the air by the zero carbon team here at DCC. You follow best practice. Can you just comment on that, please?
Yes, I would say we do our best to follow best practice, and it's an evolving field, and we as much as practicable, keep up with that. So we do follow best practice. Our target is a science-based target, which is covered off in the report, what that refers to, and also our organisational emissions inventory is externally audited and verified each year, and they always have feedback for us on minor improvements, and we implement what we can and what's practical.
Councillor Vandervis, then Ms Wesley-Smith.
You've talked about promoting e-bikes. Is the carbon effect, from your perspective, different between an e-bike and an e-car, which is 10 times safer to drive? There's no real scheme that council can look at to subsidise electric vehicles that I'm aware of, in the same way that sort of salary sacrifice scheme exists. I would say that in the zero carbon team, we're supportive of staff where they're able to using electric vehicles as a mode of travel. E-bikes have a far lower cost up front, so there's a lower barrier for entry. In the main, you can get a cheap second-hand EV now, but it's not sort of either or. E-bikes are something that we've looked at ways that we could support because there's sort of opportunities there. So definitely, if staff are travelling in electric vehicles instead, great. Yeah. My question was, do you consider them to have the same carbon footprint?
In terms of the manufacture, an electric vehicle would have a higher carbon footprint. Not that we're counting those emissions, but those emissions occur somewhere. It's just a larger thing. There's more materials that go into it. In terms of their operation, if you're charging overnight an EV compared to charging an e-bike, they're basically both zero, very close to zero.
Thank you. And I note that more than one person can more easily travel on an e-car as well. You said earlier that we're not really helping anyone by exporting electricity to the grid. I found that kind of curious, especially with the following, solar panels thing where you do want to export to the grid. Can you expand on what you mean by not really helping anyone by exporting electricity to the grid?
What I meant by that is at that particular time when all the hydro lakes were overflowing, there's lots of electricity going through the grid. There wasn't really a benefit to DCC or to other users in terms of adding more electricity to the mix at that time. That was quite that's not that common that we have that much electricity generation capacity. So in general terms, if we can export to the grid during peak power consumption, then that's a good thing in terms of us getting something out of exporting that electricity and it reducing the reliance on coal and gas elsewhere. But just at that particular time, the share of renewables was so high, and the amount of electricity being generated was such that there wasn't a benefit in terms of the export price we got, and there wouldn't really have been a real world difference in terms of the amount of energy pumping around the system.
So you wouldn't have got a really good price, but surely there'd be a benefit in supplying electricity because excess supply would mean the overall price would be lower, surely.
I don't think what we're exporting would be the scale that it would really make a difference there. But this is getting beyond my understanding of electricity market dynamics.
Okay, my last question. You talked before about 1 tonne of methane being the equivalent of 27.2 tonnes of CO2. Isn't it the case that methane in the atmosphere degrades over 10 years and CO2 doesn't, so that equating them is kind of a bit odd?
They do behave very differently in the atmosphere, as you say. That conversion is based on the impact that those gases have when considered over a 100-year period. So that's based on climate scientists' calculations who have bigger brains than me. So we follow those standard global warming potential conversions. But you're very correct that methane, in terms of what it does in the atmosphere and how long it stays there, has a very different impact than CO2. So I don't dispute what you're saying there in terms of...
Okay, but just to be clear, you've mentioned that it's 27 times basically in terms of tonnage equivalent, and yet it was also accepted that it's 15 times more damaging. It seems to me that a lot of these figures seem to be arbitrary.
I was nodding while Councillor Sims was explaining the concept of methane having a higher warming potential than CO2. That wasn't me agreeing with that 15 figure. That was me agreeing with the concept, and then I clarified the current understanding of what that warming impact is over a 100-year period.
But it is accepted as best practice that methane is 15 times more damaging. IPCC.
I think it's be good to go back and check those figures.
I'm just trying to figure out what we're dealing with here. It seems to be all over the place. But no, thanks for answering.
Thank you. I've got Ms. Wesley-Smith, then Councillor Ong and Councillor Treble.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie. Kia ora korua. I just want to initially thank you for the report. It's a topic that I haven't been across the detail of, and the report was really well written. Thank you. My question is around there's a mention of a Treaty of Waitangi analysis was completed in the initial phases and the development of the implementation planning. Is this publicly available? I just did a quick Google search and couldn't find it. Or is there any reference to it anywhere that I can read?
It was something that was done internally. I can certainly pick that up and I'll find it somewhere in our I don't want to discount how it informed the work and its importance, but off the top of my head, I will find it and I'll come back to you essentially. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. And following on from that, I also noted that Taki Hararu will be considered at an individual project level as part of implementation. And given that there are a number of projects that are currently on hold waiting for 10-year plan consideration, is there resourcing in-house to do a little bit of Taki Hararu analysis on some of those projects now? In particular, I'm thinking of the community hub projects in terms of, emission reduction is the primary goal, but there are some secondary elements that will be beneficial to wider community, especially given our current kind of geopolitical situation. I just wondered if there's been any thought to developing or doing any kind of Taki Hararu analysis, given that Manawhina's given some really clear, key intents and directions around what they want to see in this particular area.
Another great question that I'll take away. I am standing in for Jinty, who has a wider overview of all the different things going on with the team. So I will take that away and come back to you on that one.
Great, thank you. And just one final question, but it might be more of a procedural question for the chair maybe, and that's just around, is there a forward work program for the committee? Just thinking about what has been presented here this morning and reports coming back. Do we know when and what other, just as a new committee member, what else is going to be coming up?
Thank you. I think we will be working on the forward work program, because at the end of, or at the start of this triennium, everything, well, at the end of the last triennium, the start of this triennium, everything was put into council, and I think there's some work needed to extract it out of the council forward work program and put it into the committees as well. So thank you for highlighting that. I just want to ask a question just following on from that. There was some work done around co-benefits of some of the projects, and I wonder if Te Taki Haruru or the Te Tiriti o Waitangi was in that work. So I just flagged that something did come to council at one stage.
Yes, that was in that co-benefit analysis. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Ong, then Councillor Treadwell.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is, how do you see transport emissions being reduced if we help to facilitate financial subsidies for our bus service and increasing the usage further for our community, whether it's through working with Otago Regional Council now or from future cost savings from potential consolidation of Otago Regional Council into a combined territories board in the not so distant future?
Oh, my apologies, Mr. McLean, cutting you off unintentionally. I'm not sure it's appropriate for Mr. McLean to answer this question as posed. It's beyond the remit of this particular report, which is an inventory report.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Ong.
Can I? Okay,
yeah, well, I'll just point out that the subsidies are an ORC thing, and the Combined Territory Board is work that's being worked on. We're being asked to note the report in front of us. Councillor Treadwell.
Tēnā koe, Mr. McLean, and thank you for your expansive delivery today. And apologies for coming back onto the e-bikes thing, but to get me thinking, so I park my e-bike underneath the library in the staff area, and that's pretty much always packed. Like, the capacity's pretty sorted. I was just curious if there's any initiatives that you're aware of to increase that capacity. That feels like one of those facilitatory things that we have, and maybe something which would have been shelved.
It's something that property has considered previously and has looked at occupancy of that bike storage area. I would say my assessment is the same as yours, that lately that bike storage area has been heaving, which is a very recent change for obvious reasons with fuel prices and that getting a few bikes out of sheds and that sort of thing. So it is something that could be looked at again.
Appreciate that, and great to hear it. I'd also just ask on the comparison between e-bikes and other e-vehicles. Is the impact on roading, which incurs emissions cost, equivalent between the two?
Heavier vehicles create higher damage to roading infrastructure. In terms of the comparison between the two, I haven't done any sort of detailed analysis into that.
Awesome, thank you.
Councillor Walker is going to move this, and I'm happy to second it. Councillor Walker, would you like to speak to the report, please?
Yeah, thanks. Interesting discussion, councillors, and thanks obviously to Mr. McLean and Mr. Rowe, who I've never seen so quiet, Ms. McTavish et al. And also thanks Mr. McLean for the workshop. I think we all appreciated that. It was very helpful, but in many ways, I don't know about anybody else, but I find climate-related workshops sort of the agony and the ecstasy. Anyway, great questions from councillors, and yes, forward work programme I'm sure will emanate and would be awesome because it helps us all. And Councillor Hall, it would be awesome if we fast track many of the things that are in our zero carbon programme, but of course we as councillors have competing priorities. I'm sure we're all aware of that. And Councillors Gary and Treadwell, there's no impediment at all to us looking at multiple mode shift options already in existence, and definitely more e-bike parking. What a great problem to have. It just needs us to encourage the organisation to promote these. And if there's any consolation just on e-bikes, we've talked about it a lot. The bike shop I was talking to yesterday, because as I told a bunch of you, I got a puncture the other day and had to go to the bike shop. They've actually run out of e-bikes, and they're calling it the straighter hormuz factor. So who would have known that somebody like me would have been thanking President Trump for his impelling of some of my dreams. Anyway, these two papers, as the Mayor has pointed out, are largely for noting. They are, of course, in essence, responses, staff responding to past motions of council, and, of course, following the direction that we, as councillors, have set for them. And as I mentioned earlier, sorry, Mana Whenua reps, I do feel sorry for you coming into this this first meeting with these two papers, because they are difficult, actually. And I think I'm sort of, this is sort of my territory, and I find this stuff really, really tough. And I know some of the new councillors I've spoken to do as well. I mean, getting one's head around just the zero carbon policy, zero carbon implementation plan, the emissions management and reduction plan, understanding organisational emissions versus citywide emissions are hard enough without trying to understand ISO 14064 and then trying to dissect the various reporting methodologies and organisations involved in analysing, reporting and feeding back data. And then, of course, it's committing to memory of all the acronyms that surround it all. So very good luck. That said, this paper, it's an excellent paper, and again, just do thank staff reports. The DCC's organisational emissions, as we've talked about, and we've seen the papers from Q1 to July to December, and the progress on our zero carbon plan projects. Again, as the paper mentions, these are preliminary and somewhat incomplete, and I think Mr. McLean definitely points out that they are providing an indicative trend only. It's a provisional snapshot, but a welcome snapshot. And of course, that data shows that, and a few of you have mentioned it, that emissions are 34% below the baseline, but 5% higher than that same period of last year. And so, Mr. McLean, there's certain reasons for that, and that hence my question around that. That will likely shift as the years go forward, and I think we will see some shift with what's going on currently. If the situation in the Mideast isn't resolved, I think it will have a significant effect around the world, actually, on lowering transport emissions in the same sort of way that COVID had a different effect. More specifically, of the 54 time-bound carbon projects, 20 are on track, 27 are delayed or reduced in scope, and 7 have major delays or on hold. Most project delays are not expected to significantly, that's reassuring, affect the DCC's emission targets. However, as again a few people have mentioned in the question, several key waste diversion initiatives, particularly that demolition, that wood, the demolition waste. I never knew this when I first came to council, how destructive wood in landfill can be. That they are on hold, which could potentially compromise the city's ability to meet its targets. And of course, if that timber continues to go to landfill at current rates, it could add, I think it said something like potentially 7% emissions, potentially causing our targets to be missed. Other delayed or descoped actions that may affect the targets, of course, include the LPG, projects to reduce the LPG, particularly at Moana Pool, which, as we know, is a major LPG user. And again, as we discussed, and to encourage staff to switch to sustainable travel options, which currently contribute, I think it's over 500 tonnes of CO2 annually. Yeah, I guess to help to close that gap, the paper tells us that the DCC is exploring additional initiatives such as solar, and I think that's something Councillor Hall mentioned, as such as solar generation at high energy sites. It seems really logical, and further fleet efficiency measures which could reduce emissions while also generating those organisational cost savings. And as indicated in the question I asked, the future direction will largely be dictated by decisions that we as a council make next year in what's likely to be quite a lengthy and difficult 10-year plan project. So as I mentioned, this paper is obviously, don't forget, this is for noting, so I just urge you to vote in favour. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Weatherall, then Councillor Chambers, then Councillor Ong. Councillor Weatherall.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie. I truly live in hope that every time I read these reports, I will be able to extract a clear and meaningful understanding of the progress DCC is making around its carbon emission reductions. From reading this report, I must say my hopes are dashed, as I'm still struggling to find clarity from the pages of complex data. We're told emissions are down 34% on baseline, but up 5% on last year. So are we improving or are we going backwards? Going by today's questions from my colleagues, this isn't clarity, it's confusion. There is also no mention in this report how much this program is costing our ratepayers and what they are getting in return from the zero carbon program. If we expect the public to support this work, we owe them transparency, simplicity and accountability. So I will continue to live in hope that in 6 months' time we will be reviewing a much more simplified report which shows if Council's ambitions are being achieved or whether our emissions continue to plateau, meaning we should stop spending to the extent we are if further gains are simply not achieved. Thank you.
Councillor Chambers.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very, very complicated report, lots of information presented for us to digest, but I think Mr McLean's done a good job in presenting it in a colourful and clear way and getting it around to those of us who are not experts in this area. The fact that we don't capture the quantum of emissions associated with trucking that waste to Timaru at the moment is a bit disappointing. Perhaps a little bit of a kind of lets us off the hook a little bit from that respect. But I think in general the transporting of waste away from the city could become a big important point for us to discuss in the coming weeks. And I'd be interested to know how much the emissions associated with that. And perhaps it might give a message that if you're going to use trucking for waste, you really want a trucking company that uses electric trucks moving forward. So that's what I'm going to say. So I think it's an interesting and impressive report.
Councillor Ong, then Councillor Vandervis.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I want to thank Warri for the presentation just now. I want to read specifically from one very key part of the section, which is, it concluded that achieving the city's targets would require a wide range of government, community and business stakeholders to pull all available levers as hard as credibly possible. And I think this is a very key point from this presentation to take away and to think going forward that working towards climate sustainability and zero carbon is not a cost and should not be seen as a cost for our city and community, but it should be seen as an opportunity to achieve greater financial returns for our city, our community and council. And I will say we need to use all the financial, economic and investment tools towards achieving this. And that is firstly through our ability to use our community's investment funds under the Waipori Fund to make active strategic investments in listed and unlisted international and domestic companies that will provide both financial returns for our community to grow our community services, and will bring into our city strategic expertise, innovation, jobs, and cooperation with these companies for zero carbon solutions we need. And this is known globally, of course. We know it as the global impact investing industry. Now, the second point is we need to review, of course, our statement and investment policy framework for our Waipori Fund. Because if our Waipori Fund is generating optimal returns based on its policy for our community and our state, looking at it, when we look at some of the companies it's excluded from investing in. One example.
Just one moment. I think we were talking about the paper in front of us, not about the Waipori Fund, and you do know that the SIPO is coming to council to discuss.
So that is allocated time.
Just stop and don't talk over me. We are not going to talk about the Waipori Fund today.
Okay,
you
I'll
know
move on
that it's
to my
coming
next
to council.
point then.
Okay.
I'll move on to my next point. The second point is on closer collaboration between council entities, because we do have a very important part of our council entity, which is City Forests, a major producer of carbon credits and bioenergy supply. Now, City Forests uses waste wood that helps third parties move away from coal and gas. And so principally it just seems very much a lever that we can pull, and has been outlined, this is one of the available levers that we can pull to say, between different council entities, please work more closely together with City Forests to see how there will be key performance metrics and goals towards achieving these climate sustainability and zero carbon goals, and at the same time generate a greater financial return from what are our council commercial businesses. The third point is, of course, as I was questioning or raising as a point, and I think we appreciate from transport emissions, a key factor in reducing this, and has been the case, is increased usage of public transport. And that means right now, can we work more closely with Otago Regional Council to say, we want to provide financial subsidies that we do need also at the moment because of the surge in fuel costs that are outside of our control simply due to global geopolitical tensions. And then if we're increasing that public usage of public transport, I believe it's been well presented to us in the presentation. Transport emissions have gone down because of public transport usage, and we can do something now that helps our community in the cost of living and further reducing transport emissions. And I would hope that across our elected members, but also across our elected members at Regional Council, they do appreciate that this is a very long-term approach in achieving zero carbon and climate sustainability, because I will say to our elected members, perhaps across our Regional Council, perhaps in 2.5 years' time, our community will appreciate what you're doing in providing that financial subsidy for our bus service, because if the time comes where we have a consolidation of Regional Council, I think our community will recognize what you have done right now to support our community. If you so have to stand for Dunedin City Council with the consolidation of Otago Regional Council into the C2B that we may see within the next 2.5 years to come.
Councillor Van Der Wes.
Councillor Weatherall has, I believe, very accurately and correctly raised the issue of us as a council spending extraordinary amounts of money every year for many years now to reduce carbon emissions. This paper, item 7, says, what it basically says is that we've had a 5% increase in carbon emissions in the last 6 months as a snapshot. There's a whole lot of stuff that has been wrapped around it to try and make that very unfortunate result not look so bad, but that's the guts of it.
I just need to be careful about what you say about the stuff's been wrapped around it to make it seem less unfortunate. That is perhaps aimed at the report writers, and I don't think that's appropriate.
Right, well, Councillor Walker's point that these papers are difficult and I find them really tough, I think is has been accepted, and I would present that as a indication of a report that lacked clarity and that didn't actually focus on the particular 6-month reporting period that it relates to. We need to recognise that the DCC emissions management and reduction plan for this 6 months at least has not yielded a welcome snapshot, as Councillor Walker again tried to describe it. A 5% increase in emissions is not welcome if you're interested in reducing emissions, and especially if you look at the significant costs that are involved in trying to get the DCC emissions management and reduction plan to be effective. In the next item, item 8, we will see the more overall view of the Dunedin City Council, some of which has been included in here, and I refer to paragraph 3 on page 19, where it references previous years. But these previous years are the COVID years. The COVID years of more people working from home, the COVID years where the economy shrunk, the years where there were a lot more EVs coming onto the market, where internal combustion engines became much more efficient. And these issues alone would account entirely, in my view, for the 1.5% reduction since the baseline that we've had in emissions, which would suggest that the entire spending by the DCC on emissions management and reduction has yielded almost no quantifiable result, but has cost us many millions of dollars. I'll leave it there.
Councillor Treadwell.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. I really think this is a very commendable report. We put staff in quite a tricky position often as governors, wherein if we don't include enough information, it seems, ripe for interrogation. But then if we include lots of information, the report is sort of deemed too complicated, as would appear to be the case in this instance. However, I think it was really valuable, and particularly Mr. McLean's efforts in clarifying were excellent. I thought it was a good and solid report. Notably, I think it was really adequately explained that the 5% increase from the previous year was largely in part to a change in how the emissions are calculated, both within the report at length and then by McLean further on. So I wouldn't want to mischaracterise that aspect of it. I would like to agree with Councillor Ong that this is an opportunity. This isn't just an onerous activity or something that doesn't benefit us that we're doing here. Emissions and the carbon economy are complicated, and how we choose to engage with them affects our relationship with other cities, with other countries. It has very measurable impacts on tourism and our reputation. And these are benefits that maybe aren't captured in this report because it has a specific remit, but they are important to the city. More critically, though, is that we can't lose sight of the point of all this, which is we want to leave a livable world for the next generation to inherit. And we're aware that everybody has to do their part in this. We're a large organisation here with actually quite a lot of capacity to turn the dial. If we expect other organisations of this size and this power, if we let them off the hook, then we really, can't be expecting anything like a 1.5 degree warming world. Then we're just kind of letting it all go. With regard to the measurable impacts of the spend on carbon zero, it's in the report. I mean, both in this report and the subsequent report, you'd have to be denying quite a lot of the science behind climate change that's well accepted to say that there's no measurable impact from the measures that we are taking. I think that much is uncontroversial. So I'd like to credit the staff both in their efforts in these zero carbon measures and in providing this report. Ka mihi.
Councillor Sims and Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Ms Sophie. I'd actually commend the tables that are shown here, and I think it's actually incredibly useful data for the decisions that lie in front of this council in the next little while. What it shows me here is that we could issue everybody in Dunedin with an e-bike. We could issue every DCC staff member with a new BYD, but the impact of that would be imperceptible compared to the impact of closing the Green Island landfill. And while we continue to dump rubbish onto the ground at Green Island, everything else we do is moot. The other, and I'm not going to make this point very well, but I'm going to try and make it anyway, is that the impacts, I agree with Councillor Treadwell. We must do absolutely everything we can do to reduce our carbon emissions as an organisation and as a city. However, external events such as what we're seeing at the moment are always going to have a far greater impact on that. So I'm not saying we don't need to do this, but we need to recognise that we could spend enormous quantities of money, and that could be trumped by actions overseas that are, the orderly queue at our BYD showroom at the moment would indicate that, as Councillor Walker said, Mr Trump has done more to drive this goal than perhaps we could have ever imagined. But the point I'm trying to make is I think we have to be very careful about spending enormous amounts of money when external impacts have a far greater impact as well, and we have to be alert to that. So, but having the information is incredibly useful for the decisions that are coming in front of us, and I congratulate the staff for that.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. Other colleagues have covered off a number of points, but I want to reiterate some of them. And I want to start with the Niuean proverb, when elders are wise, generations that follow will prosper. And I'll come back to that during my debate. The important thing here is the direction of travel. And as an organisation, that's really what we're talking about here in terms of the emissions management and reduction plan and the impact of that currently. And I asked the question about best practice for a particular reason, because it would be very easy to listen to some colleagues around this table and suggest that our zero carbon team were picking things out of the air. That is simply not the case. They follow best practice. It is a very complex area, that is true, but it is up to us as individual governors to step up and strive to understand, and if we don't, to ask the relevant questions. The team are following best practice, they're following IPCC, they're following climate science, and we have extraordinary expertise on that team. So let's acknowledge that and treat our staff with the respect that they are due. My regret is that some of the initiatives that we had open to us, we did not follow. And at this time in the world crisis with the Strait of Hormuz and the crisis in the Middle East, how much further would we be ahead had we not curbed some of those levers that we could have as an organisation pulled? Was it the whole answer? No, of course not. But we're required as an organisation in this city to show leadership. And I link that with the Zero Carbon Alliance. We are looked to show leadership. And let us not, let's dispel this idea that we're spending millions and millions with not much result. I absolutely disagree with that. There was a report by Deloitte, and I don't have the figures at my fingertips, but basically what it outlined was that climate change and the investment that is required for it is also an opportunity. And the opportunity in terms of investment return is large. And so there's an opportunity here for us as an organisation to step up. Yesterday I had a conversation with a business in town that is doing very well, thriving in fact, because of this crisis in a really positive way in the area of solar. And so some of our businesses here will prosper tremendously through the opportunities that the crisis provides. And I was wondering if perhaps Councillor Simms was making an offer there about BYD, but perhaps not. Every little bit counts. And we should be asking ourselves the question here as an organisation, as governors of this organisation, what more can we be doing? That's what we should be asking. And I come back to the whakatauki that I think is applicable for this discussion, and that is mō tātou amu ka uri amuri ake nei, for our children after us, for us and our children after us. And if any of you have children, you will know how important this is to be showing leadership at this time.
Councillors Hall, then Lund. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy to support this report. I think it is important because it gives us an honest picture of where Dunedin is making progress and where we are not. It is encouraging to see emissions trending overall down, especially biogenic methane, but it is also clear we still have a lot more work to do if we want our targets to match reality. For me, the value of this report is it helps us make better decisions based on evidence and not wishful thinking. We cannot reduce what we do not measure. We cannot lead if we're not honest about where we stand. Thank you.
Councillor Lund.
I believe that leadership is showing the ratepayers that they can expect transparency, simplicity and accountability as Councillor Simms, Vandervis and Wetherall have raised. And I was encouraged slightly by the pragmatism that the zero carbon team displayed around the issue with the gas engine. And despite what the responses from that team is, that was a pragmatic economic decision not to export electricity because it wasn't economic at the time. Now, my overriding issue is that, I think this report, the measures contained within it and the activities of the zero carbon team, they appear to want to be early adopters. And I think that is not a prudent position for the council to take. I think that we need to wait till solutions reach the mass market stage when the cost to implement such measures are lowered dramatically. For example, the solar measures. If councils spend any money at all on any solar energy measure up until 18 months ago, then they probably spent twice what they needed to related to the current technology. Another great example is what Councillor Simms referred to today with the landfill emissions, where we have an opportunity to use a solution that wasn't even around 18 months ago to reduce 15,000 tonnes of CO2 to a mere 600 tonnes, and that, in response to Councillor Chambers, is actually the transport emissions. And yes, it can be reduced further by the use of hybrid trucks. So I believe that, as I said, we need to be just judicious here. We need to adopt the Pareto principle. We need to get the 80% result with the 20% of cost. And I also believe that the council might need to learn from what its staff is telling them around their staff travel choices. I think the Dunedin City Council is probably the organisation in Dunedin that's done the most to promote alternatives to transport, yet stubbornly 90% of its staff are still using cars or hybrids, and that is because of Dunedin's climate, its hills, its large footprint, the fact that people have families, groceries, and etc., and a myriad of other priorities means that maybe we have to accept that 10% is going to be the upper limit. Lastly, I'm not convinced that the data in the report is all correct. For example, in paragraph 21, that talked about the overall change in waste volumes was decreased by 3.6%, but increased, but all our recent reports since the election in October shows 8 to 12% decreases. I do believe the councillor has got a good point that we are spending a great deal of money to achieve a negligible result. And as he has pointed out, the headline number is that we've gone backwards by 5%. And in response to Councillor Treadwell, that was due to a change in accounting. But even if that's taken into account, as it's noted on paragraph 21, we're still 2% higher. That is not the direction of travel that we want. And as Councillor Sims pointed out, we have the opportunity to really move the dial by adopting a solution that wasn't in front of us 18 months ago.
I just have a few comments, and I think that we need to be very careful when we're talking about staff about calling them they. Staff are carrying out the decisions that council made, and we are the they. So I think that when we refer to staff, they are acting on decisions that we have made, not acting themselves. I want to thank Mr. McLean for his in-depth knowledge. Science is very difficult, as evidenced by some of the questions around the table, and it is complicated. I found one of the graphs, pie charts very useful in the next paper, which is talking about what are our highest emissions and what can we concentrate on as well. I want to thank the staff for their dedication across council to lowering the emissions, because it is actually the staff that have, under our direction, carried out the wishes to lower the emissions, and we see that 34% is down for the baseline year. It is unfortunate, the baseline from 2018-2019, it's unfortunate that they're up 5%, and we are often challenged by changes in measurement as well, but we do need to keep an eye, especially on the waste. So I think that Councillor Sim certainly talked about that, is we need to concentrate on targeting the things that matter, and when we look at what are the biggest levers that we can pull, it is around waste and also transport, the things that make the impact. I also want to congratulate the DCC on the DCC internal waste volume. So I did ask a question there about was it the internal waste, because I think that we have a really important role in leadership. That's why I also asked around the staff travel plan. I also think we should have a councillor's travel plan, and I know that I see a lot of EVs in the car park and a lot of people riding e-bikes, and I think someone's recently bought an e-bike and proudly posted a picture of themselves, so we're interested to see the stats on that. I do know that Mr. Trump has obviously caused a increase in the EV for sale, because I had another look to upgrade my Leaf to save a little bit of money, and there weren't many available. So that is one thing, I guess, that people are being driven by the current fuel crisis to actually think about their impacts, not necessarily on lowering carbon, but on their back pockets. And I think that something was brought up around the co-benefits of the things that we do to try and help people access easier transport, and public transport was brought up. That will probably come up in the next paper, which is around what the Citywide is doing. This paper was very clearly on the DCC emissions as opposed to the city emissions, and perhaps it was challenging that we had the two papers in a row as to people's understanding of those. We are committed as a city to lowering our carbon footprint. We know that our community want us to do this, especially our young people. It's a very real thing that they are concerned about the world that we leave behind, and we do have a moral duty as leaders to do what we can. We also have the duty to target the things that make the biggest impact. So that is why I asked about when is the implementation plan coming back to council, because those will be council decisions about what and where we invest on. If no one else wishes to speak, I'll pass it back to Councillor Walker for your right of reply.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting commentary, and I'll try my best to reply to everyone. Forgive me if I don't capture you, because I was frantically typing as you were all speaking. Councillor Weatherall, first, yeah, sorry you're struggling, but as I mentioned, this stuff is tough, and I think we've well traversed that. But I would argue, in answer to your question, that we are definitely improving and reducing our carbon emissions, but it's going to be a long and tough journey. And related to cost, sadly, I mean, and I'll mention this to a couple of people, the cost of doing nothing around zero carbon will ultimately result in massive costs down the line to both communities and council budgets, ironically. Councillor Chambers agreed this report makes a difficult set of numbers very readable. So, and I think that's testament to a zero carbon team. Councillor Wrong, I mean, your commentary in the Wide Prairie Fund, this is a emissions management reduction plan and zero carbon implementation plan paper, so I won't comment further. Councillor Van der Vos, again, the price of doing nothing about climate change, I did a quick search, well, I've searched this many times over the years, at the moment is estimated at the tens of trillions of dollars in global economic damages, and potentially 54 to 69 trillion by 2100. That's just at 1.5 to 2 degrees warming. In that inaction risks roughly 2.3% drop in global GDP by 2050, widespread ecosystem destruction, and doubling, and this is a worrying one, doubling of annual humanitarian aid needs to over 20 billion. And we don't have to look beyond our shores in New Zealand, the tragedies that have happened up north, to see the consequences of climate effects. Councillor Treadwell, it is a commendable report, and you are a bit of a dreamer, eh? Just wanting a livable world. Gosh, big dreams. Mr. McLean, as I pointed out at the workshop, has, and I think you spoke to us, has an incredible ability, I think, of being able to answer in a clear, concise and calm fashion, way calmer than I'd probably be, so I commend him for that, as you did. Councillor Sims, yeah, it is incredibly useful data. You're not wrong, you're correct. There are many imperceptible outcomes for our targets. If we all had e-bikes, but you forget probably that there are other accrued benefits to I'll just use biking as an example because I do it most days, and that's those well-being, those uncapturable well-being upsides. And this morning was a good example of that, and I've got photos I can show you after of an amazing sunrise coming up as I cycled along the harbour looking across at the peninsula. I don't think that stuff ever gets captured, and it shouldn't be understated that there's other accrued benefits just to the actuality of those climate emissions. Councillor Gary, yeah, the direction of travel, and I hope you intended that pun, is important. I'm like you, regretting that some of the initiatives that we've looked at in the past haven't been put forward or progressed. But to be honest, I remain someone as the glass who would be Finland, Denmark, or Germany in this space, rather than a current United States that is pulling back on all its commitments to Paris, etc. The list is long, and your business comments are really pertinent, actually. And I think a business in 2026 that doesn't have climate considerations as front and central of its business plans is probably a business doomed to fail. Councillor Hall, thank you as ever for being so succinct, and the overall downward trend is encouraging. You're not wrong. Councillor Lund, yes, leadership is showing ratepayers that we care about rates. I don't think anybody around this table doesn't care about rates, but it's also showing our ratepayers that we care about the whenua, the awa, the why, the environment, and generations to come who may have to suffer the effects of our lack of action around climate change. And finally, Mayor Sophie, spot on. We are the they, and we must not forget that. And as I pointed out in my speech, that staff are simply carrying out the motions of council that we vote on around this table. Please don't forget that. Thank you.
Thank you. I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against?
No.
No. Recorded, please.
So we've got those three. Okay, thank you. Now, just feel the temperature of the room. Would anybody like an adjournment? Okay, I move that we have a 10-minute adjournment. Seconded Councillor Walker. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? That is carried. Back everyone. We are going to do item 8, Dunedin City Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory for the 2025 financial year. The report on page 38, and I'll welcome back Mr. McLean to speak to this report.
I might just explain what I'm doing sitting here
Following
the earlier comment from Councillor Walker. So the other Mr. McLean, Scott McLean, is on leave. I'm currently acting for Scott for the next week, hence why I'm here.
Thank you.
And hence why I'm being so quiet.
Thank you. It wasn't on my list. I'm like,
And I'm acting for Ginty, so you've got the B team today. So.
But the benefit of that is not two Mr. McLeans sitting here.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Now, do you wish to have some opening remarks?
Yes. The first thing is just kind of a technical thing. So in the report that we've written, you see there's a statement we make about forestry cover increasing from 2018-19 to 24-25. That's in paragraph 18F. It states that it's increased from 16,000 hectares to a bit over 17,000 hectares. That's the correct data that we hold, but in the report there is an error, which is page 52 of your agenda in attachment A. The ACOM report states that there's a reduction in exotic forest cover. That's based on an error they had in their data that's been resolved, but they didn't. I didn't catch that mistake. So just in case anyone had picked up on that, that figure that we have in the report is the correct one. The other, Councillor Vandervis asked a question that I'll do my best to answer as he's not able to be here to ask it again. So my understanding of the question was that essentially between 2018-19 and 24-25, a 13% reduction works out as about 1.5% reduction per year, and could that be attributed to COVID and working from home and uptake of EVs and more efficient petrol vehicles and diesel vehicles and that sort of thing? So in terms of responding to that as that being the cause of emissions reducing, you can go to page 43 of the agenda, which gives a table of the gross emissions changes from 2018-19 to 24-25 by emission source. So you can see for on-road transport, which includes heavy vehicles, light fleet, all vehicles on the road, you can see there's a very modest decrease, so a 2% decrease in those emissions over that period, but that most of the reduction in transport emissions comes from reductions in marine freight and cruise ships, which is just summarised as marine in that table, air travel, and a slight reduction in rail. So it's mostly marine emissions reductions and air travel emissions reductions, which contribute to that transport emissions reduction. So I hope that answers Councillor Vandervis's question, but happy to provide further information over email or the like, if that hasn't. But otherwise, I'll take questions.
Thank you. I had a question. It was on page 68, and it is talking about the induced activity method for marine diesel freight. And recently, some of us visited Port Otago, and I don't have the statistics with me, but they were talking about how much of their freight or exports come from outside Otago, or outside Dunedin, Otago, etc., Timaru, all of those kind of things, and it just says that the calculated emissions from freight are allocated despite the understanding that imports and exports through Port Otago service an area larger than Dunedin City. So we're getting all the emissions from a lot of the export of the lower South Island. Are we looking to change that methodology at all?
So we haven't kind of attributed to different areas of Otago and Southland in this report. It's something that could be looked at next time round. It would have added additional cost and time, and we would have needed to have landed on a method. So it was outside of the scope of this. It's something that could be considered in terms of what we do and what we're presenting here. We basically are looking to update what was done previously, but if that's something that there was appetite to explore, we could look into that and provide that sort of split.
Yeah, I just wonder whether there's a rule of thumb about whether it's worth investigating, I guess, because transport is one of our biggest emitters. So should it be, for example, Southland paying for their own emission or calculating their own emissions? That's a challenge there. And I completely get if there's a cost of measuring them and it's significant to perhaps what's insignificant, if you get what I mean, big cost, small return, if we think about that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it would be a big cost, but in terms of rule of thumb, I would say this is a grey area, and as such, we didn't think it was appropriate to make a determination, and ultimately, where emissions are attributed to, there's a certain point where it doesn't matter whether it's Dunedin or Southland. It's more about the action that it's going to inspire, I suppose.
And I guess the other one is on cruise ship emissions, because is it right that if most ships who are coming here, well, maybe 50% are coming via, say, Sydney or somewhere in Australia, so is that trip being, I mean, they usually go to Fiordland, that's the key reason they're coming to the South Island, but do we get attributed those cruise ship emissions for basically the whole trip from Sydney to Dunedin, for example?
We get half a share of wherever the last port of call was, but in that cruise ship emissions calculation, Milford Sound is considered to be a port of call, and yes, or other small spots. I'm trying to think of, like, if it went to, like, say, the Sub-Ants or something, that would be considered a port of call, even though it's not a port as such. So if it's going into those small places and then Port Otago is the first kind of real port, we don't get the whole leg we get from wherever the last spot was actually.
Because previously it seemed that it was the last stop overseas, so that made me a bit nervous. Does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Chambers?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that for me the most interesting table was the one on the page 59, which kind of summarises the kind of big picture, the table at the bottom of that page. And obviously transportation and agriculture are the main areas by far where the emissions come from. Now transportation, I suspect, is using less diesel if we can, that will have maximum impact on that. Agriculture, it says that in your paper that the agriculture reduction is probably due to having less cattle and sheep in the region. But what about all the fantastic research that's been done on the diet of animals, giving them like seaweed and other things that can fantastically reduce their emissions? Is that happening?
So there's a lot of research going on in terms of ways to reduce methane emissions from ruminant animals. That, in terms of this calculation, it's not as granular to go what different feed types are used and what impact does that have on emissions. So it's not there yet in terms of these community level footprints. It's basically looking at data and how many dairy cattle, beef cattle, sheep there are, and then having a per animal emissions factor. As these technologies get implemented and hopefully our methods for calculating these emissions improve, I would hope that we can capture those innovative practices.
Councillor Gary, Treadwell, Hall, me, then Councillor Ong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr McLean, could you speak to the role that the Zero Carbon Alliance has in reaching these results and achieving these results and into the future?
Thank you, Councillor. So the role, there's sort of broad outcomes that can can come from the Zero Carbon Alliance. Some of the things around sharing of knowledge and information across all these institutions and sharing of best practice are hard to sort of tangibly pin down an emissions reduction figure from, but that's not to say there's not value in that deeper collaboration across these entities. One thing we've worked on quite closely is around staff travel planning across the organisations, and as you can see, on-road transport's a significant emission source, so if collectively we can come up with shared solutions and kind of innovative approaches through that and learn from each other, then that can have, when you look at the number of staff across those organisations, it can have meaningful reductions in on-road transport emissions, but also it could be an exemplar for other organisations.
Thank you for your answer, and I'm just wondering, how would you characterise the attitude or approach of the Zero Carbon Alliance to DCC as taking a leadership role?
I wouldn't want to speak for the other partners in the alliance, but what I would say about that is that it's an alliance of 6 organisations, and there's no one organisation at the head. It's a collaborative group across the 6. So I would say that all the organisations are looking to provide leadership, and where appropriate, we learn from each other. So I guess DCC is one of 6 working together collaboratively, trying very hard to reduce emissions within our organisations, but also work together on opportunities to reduce city emissions.
You're a real diplomat, Mr. McLean, and I'd go further and say that we're a role model. We're supposed to be a role model. Thank you.
Can I just clarify, because my question was actually, because I have to leave at past, a question around the Zero Carbon Alliance, and do all of those partners report themselves? I've just looked up the University of Otago report. The last date they report to is 2024, and they have a 36.1% reduction. So do they all separately report on their progress towards zero carbon, and how would council be able to see reporting back from the Zero Carbon Alliance? I don't get the link between the Zero Carbon Alliance coming back and talking to council.
So previously, the minutes and updates from the 6 monthly collaboration group meetings have been the mechanism to provide updates, and that collaboration group is sort of that like mana to mana level of the senior leaders within all the organisations getting together and discussing the work program and what's happened in terms of that forward planning, and also like what's happened in the last 6 to 12 months. So that's been the mechanism so far for providing an update. In terms of what all the Zero Carbon Alliance partners are doing with their own emissions, it's fair to say everyone's trying hard, but there's a mix of where organisations are at publicly reporting their emissions. One that's probably more challenging because of their structure is Te Whatuora Health New Zealand Southern, because their kind of grouping is, I think it's Te Waipunamu, so it's like the whole of the South Island is their business unit and how they report those emissions. So it's a bit harder to bring that down to a Dunedin level.
Yeah, I just want to flag that it would be quite useful to understand, we talked about ourselves being city leaders, to understand what our partners are doing. So if I could just flag that would be good to have that in the report. And I know this is a whole of city report about the change of emissions, but it would be nice to know what our partners are contributing towards this as some of the bigger emitters. Now I have Councillor Treadwell, Hall and Ong.
Tēnā kōrua. Firstly, just a question on the emissions versus sequestration sort of seesaw. We are mostly focused in this report and in the previous report on emissions reduction. Does that speak to a relative efficiency? Is it more easier or efficient for us to address emissions versus sequestration?
In terms of this report, this is a report giving an update on citywide emissions. In terms of the forestry sequestration, while you can see it plays a big role, I guess I didn't have too much to say beyond what the summarised figures were. That's not to say that it's less important than some of the things that we've elaborated on in more detail. So I guess that relative simplicity of reporting that forestry sequestration figure is why it's not more heavily canvassed than the report.
Gotcha. Just a little further to that, it seems that would sort of be less opportunities, or it would require more effort to sequester the equivalent amount of carbon versus preventing the emissions of it?
Yeah, so if we were to try and balance the current level of emissions that Dunedin City have, that requires a very significant amount of land. And also, you still have those ongoing gross emissions. Those trees don't sequester carbon forever. And so then, if you just keep on with the emissions that we have today, you require ever more and more land over the coming decades. So best practice is to reduce your gross emissions as much as you can, and then you balance out the rest with forestry sequestration. And obviously there are wider benefits from forests than just carbon sequestration. But yeah, in terms of that seesaw, you get your gross emissions down as much as you can, and then you get the ongoing benefits of that, and you kind of balance out the residual as the international best practice.
Awesome, thanks for that. I don't think any of us have an appetite for planting out the taieri and pinus or anything. So. Regarding coal versus gas, I know coal's looked at as sort of the worst and most, or sort of demonised as an emitter. Is it significantly worse than gas in terms of its emissions profile?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in a slightly complex way, which I'm good at doing. So when you look at coal versus LPG, then I don't think there's really too much of a debate there. Coal would be a higher emitter per kilowatt of energy, or whatever energy comparison you want to look at. When you talk about natural gas, it really depends where it comes from and how much is kind of leaked along the way. So liquefied natural gas, it sort of depends if you're getting it from a distant place. It depends how much leaks before it gets to you, which essentially is just methane venting to the atmosphere. As to whether coal or natural gas is better or worse. So if they were both sort of sourced from, spots right by where you're using the energy, natural gas is probably better than coal. But I was just going to say all fossil fuels. So if you can use a non-fossil fuel, that's better than any of those.
Okay, thank you for that. A more specific question on going to page 43 with regard to stationary energy. I was wondering if there was a particular role that the DCC plays in that. If we have any interventions around, subsidies to convert boilers, things of that nature, because I know a lot of businesses still running on gas boilers.
So we don't have any subsidy schemes in place. There has been investigation of sort of non-financial incentives, both mainly looking at households. That work is ongoing. But in terms of big commercial users, it's more in the partnership space and making connections and involvement in things like Electrify Dunedin, where we're looking to basically get the message out around the benefits there are in terms of operational cost savings that Councillor Hall referred to earlier, of adopting renewable energy, generating your own power, those sorts of things.
Awesome, that clarifies it quite a lot. Thank you so much. And just one final question on page 43. Just looking at the emissions reduction in rail, which is a very small part of the picture, but I was curious if that figure is because of a decrease in usage of rail, or if there were actually less emissions intensive methods being deployed.
They're still using diesel rail units. That calculation is provided by Kiwi Rail using a... Yeah, I couldn't say, to be honest. It's a very minor change. I don't think we could take from that less is being moved. maybe that they've created some slight efficiencies in what they do. I would say it's looking at the size of it and the change. It's it could be slight efficiencies that they've gained, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Sorry.
All good. Thank you.
I have to go, so I'm an apology for the rest of the meeting. Deputy Mayor Lucas is going to take the chair. The next question will be from Councillor Hall. Do you want to come up here?
Page 44. I thought refrigerants were mostly recovered these days. Is that like losses on the journey, or where does that number come from?
So the first thing I'll own with the refrigerants is that it's national level data, kind of downscaled on a per capita basis. But in terms of where the emissions occur, yes, it's leakage. Leakage within refrigerant systems that need to be topped up, and then it'll be calculated based on what the top up is, or if, as you say, fridges and freezers and those sorts of things, as part of the, I think it's Cool Safe program, should be getting diverted and those gases recovered. But it could be some sort of national estimation about which ones aren't, and that gas is just escaping. Yeah.
This next one's a little fiddly. This is less important, but part of the whole story. On page 44, says the current net zero target for all other gases by 2030 is unlikely to be achieved. What are we doing to come up with a realistic target and maybe a pathway for those lesser gases?
So all other gases, that refers to all other gases, all gases excluding biogenic methane. So it's not sort of lesser, it's not sort of a kind of a grouping of the rats and mice at the bottom. It's just all gases bar biogenic methane, balancing out those emissions. So that's CO2, nitrous oxide, and those refrigerant gases are the main ones. So the first point there. Second point around what are we doing? We had a workshop on Monday as sort of a first step to Council's consideration of what a refreshed target might look like, and later in the year we'll be presenting options for Council consideration in terms of what direction Council wants to set there.
Thank you, that's great.
Councillor Ong and then Councillor Lund.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mr. McLean, I want to ask about the forestry net emissions. The main contributor, geographical contribution that's from both Dunedin City and our surrounds. Can you just provide a bit of a background on what are the companies or what are the forests specifically in our city itself that are contributing to this net forestry emission change?
So we're very lucky that forestry companies in this city provide data which inputs into giving as accurate a figure on net forestry sequestration as we can get, but they do that on a confidential basis, so I couldn't split company by company.
That's fine, but this is from Dunedin City itself only, so in the context that we do have city forests which have forestry right in our city itself and our surrounds, how big a contributor is City Forest then to that? Because this is something within council then.
Yes, city forests do have forestry estate within Dunedin city limits. I would leave it to City Forests to comment on their exact share of what forestry sequesters what where. As I say, if I were to figure out the exact City Forests contribution to that, then that sort of makes it a bit easier to figure out the rest. And as such, it's the summarised figure of all forestry operators within the city, and as such, it wouldn't be appropriate to break that down further in this context.
Okay, but we could have this data provided onto us, since this is the data that we are receiving from, and to be clear, these are companies that are in our city that are providing this onto us. So we may just need a bit of time, but this can be provided onwards to us to say, these are the companies that we are receiving the information from that have provided this to us. And then also we know where our own company in our own council ranks amongst these.
If I may, Deputy Mayor, I'll jump in. I think Mr McLean's answered that, Councillor Ong, in terms of the confidentiality of the information. I think we're blessed to have the information because that allows us then to produce these reports. Dissecting it in a way that would betray that confidentiality is probably a step too far.
I'll just, if I can just ask at the very least that our own council-owned company, at least then we can know from City Forest side, that shouldn't be confidential, that's within our council. Can we know at least, maybe not now, but subsequently have that information provided to say, is City Forest amongst the top 5 contributors that are helping our city right here in this data here?
I was just saying, in response to the councillor's question, we can have a conversation with City Forests and the other forestry companies and see what further information or breakdown might be able to be provided.
Thank you, it's much appreciated. Councillor Lund. Councillor Lund, are you still there? I know you've got a question. Has anyone else got a question while we wait for Councillor Lund? Councillor Sims. Oh, sorry.
Deputy Mayor Lucas.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. Ms Sophie had left me a note that she thought you had a question. Sorry, my apologies. Councillor Sims.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lucas. Electricity consumption. So my understanding is that it's impossible to buy electricity in Dunedin that's other than 100% renewable. So how is that calculation made, or is it just all the other ancillary stuff that goes around generating that electricity, or do we cop a share of the national amount?
We cop a share of the national amount, which I guess we could debate how fair that is, given all the renewable generation that occurs in our region, our wider region. But it's a national average per kilowatt of electricity that gets divvied up based on your consumption. I guess the argument in terms of doing it that way of a national share is that if the power is not consumed here, it gets sent further up the line, and as such, it helps to avoid using coal and gas in Huntly and places like that.
There's no further questions. Councillor Walker has indicated that he would like to move this motion. Do I have a seconder for it? I'm happy to second. Oh, Councillor Treble. Thank you, Councillor Treble. Councillor Walker, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Treble, for seconding. I'll be much briefer than I was last time because there's a lot of crossover here. This report, obviously, as we've read, provides an update on the city's citywide emissions for 2024-25, and again, it's just a report for noting. But I'd be remiss of me not to again thank Mr McLean, Miss McTavish, stand-in Mr McLean, for the excellent and ongoing work in the zero carbon team. This paper, like the previous one, was an excellent paper to read. There is, as I said, there's a lot that crosses over, I think, from the previous paper, so I won't bore people with too much repetition. That said, I think it is important to highlight that we have cut overall emissions by 13% since 2019, and that the updated modelling using the latest data is underway and will come back to us later this year with revised target options. The outlook, as the paper says, hasn't shifted, and as we have read and it's been highlighted previously and a couple of questions now, the hitting the net zero 2030 target is highly unlikely, but the biogenic methane target is still well on track. However, I don't think we should hesitate in celebrating that Dunedin's emissions are down by 13% since 2019, and the biggest reductions, of course, being from waste, which have halved, coal use, which amazingly down 70%. Let's hope that trend continues. Industrial down 27%, with slightly smaller drops in transport 8%, and agriculture. 9, reflecting cleaner energy, the improved waste systems, and reduced livestock. I think the large decline in coal consumption and the shift to lower emission industrial processes highlights actually what can be achieved through purposeful action by us as a council, and of course local organisations and businesses, perhaps through the Zero Carbon Alliance. And we should take pride and pat ourselves on the back that these deliberate and manageable steps are actually producing tangible reductions in this city's overall emissions profile. So again, as I said, I'll keep it brief, so I will, and just urge you to support this paper for noting.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wetherall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lucas. Most of the inventory of emissions in this report sit well outside the DCC's direct control, particularly around citizens' transport and energy choices, along with agriculture and farming emissions. Once again, the complexity of this reporting, although comprehensive, struggles to translate into something meaningful for our ratepayers. As a ratepayer, I'm interested in how much does this reporting cost, and what measurable reductions are directly attributable to council decisions, and how does this reporting improve the lives of our ratepayers. These answers are not in this report, therefore this is again a report for the sake of reporting. If we are serious about bringing our community with us, we need to simplify the story. I feel we should only analyse and report on what is within our council control, showing what the success looks like and what value our monitoring is delivering. All other associated data reporting should be at the government's expense and not be our ratepayers' responsibility to fund. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ong.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. This is a very detailed report on emissions and reducing emissions. And going further, or rather looking at what is here and appreciating what is stated beyond this, and also what we need in the information that's provided to us in governance, is that we are talking, when we are talking about emissions and reducing emissions, we are also considering the economic development of our city, and that includes the financial statements that we see when we consider how we allocate our financial resources across many areas that are outlined here. And that includes in waste management and how that is optimally managed to support what we need and to use our resources wisely over the long term. And at the same time, it is also looking at the companies that are operating across our city, because as we see from the forestry and net emissions, these are companies which have been serving our community, including within our council itself, providing employment for our community, and they are also contributing to reducing emissions for our city. So it's clear we need more information on that to be presented to us, to say these are the businesses, this is our economy, and this is the financial statements that we also see across many of the areas covered here, so that we can, going forward, do even more in reducing emissions for our city and achieve the climate sustainability goals that we want. So there is a lot that has been detailed here, but at the same time, from what's detailed here, we can extend this further to think about, very specifically, economic development, supporting our businesses, and understanding within our council itself, for example, in city forests, how this is contributing to, very specifically, what has been stated here in reducing emissions, and also supporting our community by providing, by providing the commercial revenue as it always is. So I'm going to say I will have to abstain from voting from this, because this is a very good and detailed paper, but at the same time there's a lot that has been put forth here which is very clear that we could have a bit more on in the economic development context and in the businesses that are supporting our economic development right now.
Thank you. Councillor Treadwell.
Thanks again to staff for a fulsome and detailed report. It paints an illustrative picture of the good work that we've been doing as a council here, I think, to influence things across the city. It's very clear that the community has come out vocally and quite specifically for the council to be making measures to reduce its emissions year on year. They were very, very vocal about the net zero 2030 target specifically. Through the decisions that we make with our infrastructure, for example, and through relationships and partnerships, as Mr. McLean well outlined, we do influence the emissions that are produced by the city. Some of the more straightforward examples would be through enabling, mixed use transport, cycle lanes, encouraging public transport, things of this nature. While these aren't direct operations of the council, to say that we don't impact emissions through the decisions that we make in that regard, I think is a bit fallacious. So, as governors, we have a remit to reduce emissions. This report explains very well how the efforts that we've been making have achieved that, and in that regard, it's a fulsome report and it indicates we're doing what the community wants. So, ka mihi.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
Thank you. I'm happy to support this report. It is useful because it gives us a clearer picture of where Dunedin is making progress and where the challenge is still very real. It is encouraging to see emissions coming down in some areas, but just as importantly, this report is honest about the fact that some targets remain very difficult. For me, the value is not just in the numbers themselves, but in giving us a better foundation for future decisions. Good policy starts with good information, and this report helps us deal in facts rather than hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's a lot of information in this report, which I found very interesting. And of course, we had further discussions at our workshop earlier on in the week in this area. And at that, it was impressive that we're on a track. We're not going to be net zero by 2030, but we're probably going to be net zero on this path by 2045, which was very similar to other cities in the world, including Christchurch. And I think a comparative city was Dundee in Scotland. So, so that was a very reassuring workshop where we discussed things in more detail. I think much of the information that Councillor Ong is talking about in terms of our companies, they produce a lot of information in their own reports, which we see in detail about this aspect of their company function. The agriculture thing, I think it's pretty well known around the world in 2019 that if you feed 1% seaweed to ruminants, you reduce their emissions by 65%, which is enormous. But I think I don't think that has translated yet into common practice. If it does, and it all works out as they propose by changing these animals' diets, the report in 5-10 years could be quite different in terms of agriculture. So I think it's all very interesting and good work.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lucas. Once again, an excellent report. Is it complex? Of course, this is a complex matter. But the direction of travel is in the right direction around reducing carbon emissions as a city. And in the previous report, and it says applicable in this report, that we as a city need to pull all levers to reduce our carbon emissions. And the Zero Carbon Alliance across the city is extremely important in terms of this and our role in role modelling this for our colleagues in other large organisations. Is it meaningful for our ratepayers? Well, the people that I interact with, yes. I was here when, in fact, the very first motion I voted on as a councillor 9 years ago, was around oil and gas exploration. And we have had the gallery filled with people every time we have made important policy decisions around this. So for our mokopuna and our rangatahi, this is pivotal. They understand the importance of it. And we also have had people in an older age group coming to us. So it really depends who you talk to. There will be members of our community who will not understand this and the importance of it. One of the reasons I asked for there to be a part of our finance reports that indicated the cost of weather events. This is all linked, part of the climate science that we know. The costs are enormous, and we all have to do our part to reduce emissions, to reduce that impact. And as someone who has experienced the cost of those weather events, along with many members of our community in the South Dunedin community, I would be apoplectic as a ratepayer if this council was not doing what it needs to do and this city was not doing what it needs to do. So it's on all of us to think at a personal level, at a governance level, at a local government level, as a city level, at a local government level, central government we can influence through the general election. What we can do in regards to this. So this report is really important for outlining what the city is doing, and let's just remember we're late already.
There being no further speakers, Councillor Walker, would you like your right of reply?
Yeah, I could, but I'll probably likely end up copy and pasting lots of responses from the previous paper, so I'll spare you all from what might end up being a painful process. That said, I will just briefly speak to Councillor Treadwell's response, and not only because he used the wonderful word fallacious, but the community, he's right, the community has previously come out and told us that they want more action in the zero carbon space. So he is correct again in saying that we do, in essence, have a remit to reduce emissions. And of course, the community will have the chance during annual plan and LTP to let us know loud and clear if that's still the direction of travel they want. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No recorded, please.
Thank you. The motion is carried.
Abstention reported, please.
Thank you. Item number 9, items for consideration by the Chair. Are there any items for consideration by the Chair? Yes, Councillor Walker.
Yeah, just I guess a reminder of the forward work programme.
Yes. Yes, we've captured that, but that's a good reminder. There being nothing else, we will now close the meeting with the karakia and ask Ms. I can't think what your last name is. Sorry, Ms. Wyeth, to close the meeting with the karakia, please. My apologies.
Me inui tātou. Unuhia, ki te urutapu nui, kia wātia, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takatā. Koia rā e rongo, whakaere ake ki runga, kia tīna hui tāiki.
Thank you very much. I now declare the meeting closed at 11:54 a.m. And just a reminder, councillors, that the council meeting that was scheduled to immediately follow this has now been rescheduled for either next week or the following week. Thank you, everybody. So that gives you the gift of time for today, but we will take it another day. Thank you.